Kick Action Media presents Where No Pod Has Gone Before.
Welcome on the first episode of Where No Pod Has Gone Before. I am one of your hosts. The other host isn't here with me right now. I am the Pharmacist. Tonight's episode, Leaving Drydock. Welcome to the studios here. I'd like to introduce someone else into the podcast with me right now. He goes by producer, but I don't want to go from just giving him a producer title. He's a person out there, okay? He's a person that you should get to know and love. His name is Chris. This is Producer Chris. Producer Chris, welcome.
Yes, thank you for having me on your show. I like this. This is really neat.
Oh, well, good. The studios are really cool around here. I mean, you guys, well, once we get cameras rolling sometime, when we have a budget and when we actually have our ducks in a row, maybe we'll kind of find ourselves with faces, and you can see around the studio and be impressed. But for right now, we're going to start it with sound, and we're going to kind of gussy it up with some face shots and publicity shots of some of the things that we're going to be talking about on this podcast. But as it goes for tonight's episode, the first one, Leaving Drydock, here we go. We're starting it off. We're talking about, of course, Star Trek. What does Star Trek mean to you? Well, I'm going to start a little bit for myself. I'm just going to give you a quick introduction of who I am, the Pharmacist. I've worked in TV, radio, some independent films for, since the 80s. So, yeah, I am an old man. So my memory of Star Trek is a little bit different from a lot of the fandom out there because you've got so many different franchises. I mean, you have DS9, you have Voyager, you have the animated series, you have the different comic book series, not only from Marvel, but you have DC that took over Star Trek, and then you have this new, well, they're not younger, they've been around a while, but there's a comic company called IDW, and they're coming out with a new series of Star Trek. Basically, the story of those comic books are going to be what happens after the 5-year mission is done. So there's going to be some missing years. So we're going to have a lot of the old original Star Trek cast coming in there. And you're going to see some adventures there before Spock dies, before Kirk dies. I know, spoiler alert for those of you who don't even know that. This happens right after the 5-year mission, so this is when everybody is still plucky, still full of action in their loins and veins. So it's going to be interesting coming up here. IDW is going to be putting out that series here pretty soon in 2019. But as it goes right now, I've been a fan of Star Trek, oh boy, probably my earliest recollection is 1971, I believe. Star Trek obviously came out in 1966. I remember, well, here it is. I'm the youngest of 4 kids, 2 older brothers and an older sister. They were very cruel when they taught me some things. So when we learned tag, I was the butt of a lot of the tag. We all know what happens with tag. You get touched, you're it. So guess what? When I watched a certain episode of Star Trek with the beautiful Lee Merriweather, there's an episode called That Which Survives. Now, all of you out there who are Star Trek fans, I'm sure you all know the story. I'm not going to go into it, but suffice it to say, Lee Merriweather was beautiful. She was dressed in purple. She had a gorgeous wardrobe that basically accentuated her clavicles and a bosom, but it didn't show anything. You'll have to take a look. We'll put that on the podcast here, just so you can take a look at the publicity still. Beautiful woman. She had been around Batman. She is my favorite Catwoman, by the way. I don't want to get too far into other things right now, but that's one of them. Basically, she played a character. Her character wanted to touch someone, basically saying, I am for Dr. McCoy. So she's walking around with her arm extended, kind of creepily, trying to touch Dr. McCoy. Now, being a young guy who just learned tag, once you got tagged, you're it. That was creepy to me. That was very traumatic. So when I have this character reaching out for one of the main characters in Star Trek, that was creepy. That was one of my first memories, and that really hit me hard, mainly because also that at this time when syndication of Star Trek came out, Star Trek looked so different than every other show on there, mainly because a lot of the other shows at the time had a fully lit set. So you had so many different components. You know, if you're in a kitchen, that kitchen was the best lit kitchen in the universe. Well, in Star Trek, especially with this season, this was the third season of Star Trek, this episode, That Which Survives, a lot of the sets were in purples, in dark colors. There were swaths of light that were cut. So there was a lot of shadow play. That really stood out for me as well. And then you had the suspenseful music. So as a little kid, a lot of that stuff played perfectly on my young mind. So that was the first episode that I saw. And then from there, I was hooked, mainly because Spock had the same haircut that I did back then. So anyway, that's my first memory of Star Trek. Producer Chris, what is your first memory of Star Trek? Do you remember?
Yeah, well, mine was actually Generation, because there was a time when, and I was born in 1980, so for me, about 86, 87, I remember being roller skating in my basement, and my basement was an unfinished one, and I would roller skate down there, and there was a black and white TV that my parents would put down there because at that time it was color TV. So the black and white went to the basement, right? And I would watch I Love Lucy, and I would watch Star Trek Generation, and I would watch, there were a few other shows that would come on after school. And I remember watching that show, and now I'm not a big Trekkie, but I do remember
William Riker.
Yes.
So there we go, Jonathan Frakes.
And back then, wasn't there a big? There was some big hoopla about one of the young kids that was on there.
That was Will Wheaton.
Will Wheaton, yes. And Will Wheaton always comes up in all of these big.
Oh yeah, he's huge right now. I actually like his. He's got a cast that's about playing games, and it kind of teaches you rules about each game. I'm a huge gamer right now, board gamer.
Yes,
I love that
board
stuff
gamer.
right now.
Yeah,
dice and cards. I love it.
And, so Will Wheaton does that now.
Oh yeah, he's huge in that.
So see, to me, when I was growing up, it was Generation that was the Star Trek.
Yeah, the Next Generation. Yeah,
Next Generation. That's right. And that was also what I had comic books of as well too, because I remember comic books coming out on Next Generation. Mm-hmm. And so I had those. I would watch that show, but I don't remember. I mean, I remember.
You're gesturing like a bald guy, right?
Yes. That's what I'm doing. Nobody can see me, but I'm gesturing.
That would be Captain Jean-Luc Picard.
That's correct.
I don't know if I did the French any justice on that, but that's it's one of my favorite characters on that series, at least, too.
Yes. Now, when I look at the older Star Trek, I can't really get into it, and I think that's just because being born in the 80s, I think that I was exposed to that Next Generation one.
Yeah.
And that was that epitome of after school. You know, I would come home, it was on in the afternoon, and that's what I would watch. Or I'd watch it on, I think, the weekends or something like that. But it was always one of those things where it kind of melded in with the whole I Love Lucy and Charles in Charge and everything else, right? So it kind of like melded into that pot.
Wow, that is the 80s. I'll tell you.
It is the 80s. I know. Granted, Charles in Charge wasn't a rerun back then, but Lucy was. Yeah, but it was a part of my awakening to the sci-fi genre.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of people have a very distinct, like they love the original better. And they're, when you talk about a Trekkie, you talk about somebody who really is just into how the stories played out from that beginning.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is, you said it's, when did it start?
It started in 1966.
Okay. So
September 1966. And I'll tell you, when we were talking about, you're growing up in the 80s and, me in the 70s, I kind of go back to even my musical tastes. a lot of people around here like rap, like the hip hop stuff, and I personally don't get it.
I don't either.
I don't.
I don't either.
But
I'm
you
right
know what?
with you.
Maybe I'm not supposed to get it, and that's
Right.
probably the reason why I think Star Trek kind of started growing in different generations, adding some things on, and obviously the technology has gotten better in representing starships and that space experience. That's the thing that really grabbed me from the very beginning, was that there was a meaning to Star Trek, and I obviously that was something that kind of hit you too as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
For me, Star Trek meant that it was teamwork. That's what I mean. I wanted to boil it down. There's so many different concepts and cultures and geopolitical things grafted onto a lot of these stories, and even when we see now, the Discovery show, they're taking biblical elements, they're trying to mishmash some things. It's admirable, in some ways I don't get it, and in another way I'm looking at it and thinking maybe I'm not supposed to get it now, since I'm an older
because it's
generation,
for this generation, essentially.
Absolutely,
to get
and
involved in.
Maybe that's what it is. So Star Trek meant to me, it was teamwork back then.
Sure.
That's what I thought at least the original series conveyed to me, was that everybody had their own quote unquote power.
Right.
Everyone had their own expertise,
Their ranking.
and and not coincidentally, one of my favorite comic books growing up was the Avengers or the Fantastic Four.
Right.
Marvel Comics. It was people lending in their own. Not one guy was the one to put
Right.
it all together.
Right.
Sometimes Kirk really messed things up. Sometimes, sometimes the Dr. McCoy messed things up. Sometimes, but in all ways, Mr. Spock never messed anything up. He was always the MVP of everything.
Correct. Now, let me ask you this.
It's teamwork.
What would be your opinion on when they did the reboot of Star Trek, the original with Kirk, and it was in the movies, and
Yes.
Chris Pine played him? What did you think of that? Now, because for me, not watching the original stuff,
Yeah.
growing up with Next Generation, and I really didn't watch the movies, but I had the comics, and I even had the Enterprise.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I had a model of it. It was really neat. I had it hanging from my ceiling. It was really cool.
Wow.
But it's not that I was really into it, because it's not like X-Men or something that I was really more into. It was just something that was more of like a part of my childhood.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then when they came out with the Star Trek movie with Chris Pine in it, and it was like the whole reboot,
Yeah.
I thought that movie did really well. Like, to me, it was really good. I liked how the inside of the ship was just done. I liked how it was. I know they used computer graphics, but they also built this entire set that was just so intricate and amazing.
Oh, yeah. I loved it. I mean, there was a lot of backlash about that set.
Really?
With the way that J.J. Abrams filmed a lot of it, because there were a lot of light flares, lens flares going on with the lights. I loved it. I thought it was great. It accentuated the fact that this bridge was almost otherworldly.
Yes.
You stepped into something that wasn't just technological, but it was dreamlike in a way, and I loved it. That's one of the things I thought. One of the many things I liked about that reboot, because it emphasized that everybody does have their strengths, and everybody relied on each other. And there was a whole bunch of great action, obviously.
Yeah.
The effects were amazing.
And I think Chris Pine did really good as Kirk, because if you said that Kirk was always messing up kind of in the original, right? So you had to kind of rely on the strength of everybody else. They followed suit.
Absolutely.
Because in those movies, I know Chris Pine, he had that arrogant feel to him in the beginning, like, I'm the captain,
Yeah.
But then he was screwing up. He was causing more problems than what he was resolving. And then he started to realize, and I think that's what takes the character to like the next level, is when you feel for that character to say, oh, he's morphing, into a leader, a good leader.
He's growing into a leader. Yeah. And that's what makes a great character.
Exactly.
You see a nice change there. So that's nice. I mean, we both have our different memories of it. Do you think the world? I mean, a lot of Star Trek fans that I've spoken with, they always talk about if anyone can really look at Star Trek as a pattern of something, how can, there's so many things to benefit from Star Trek. What is the one thing that can, what's the one thing that the world can use from Star Trek, do you think? The one thing that you can think about.
Aside from warp speed?
Oh, God. Yeah. Transporter was the ultimate thing for me. I mean, I always thought if I can beam away from here, especially in class or in a bad meeting with my boss, if I can just transport away, that'd be the best thing ever.
Oh, I know. I think that, and this is just to me, but what I took from Star Trek was really more of the, I don't know, it was the camaraderie that they had, because Spock was he was a jerk, okay? He was a complete jerk in especially from what I saw in the beginning of the J.J. Abrams movie, okay? So I look to that because I never watched the original. I barely saw any of the original. Yeah. I could just imagine that they probably tried to follow that as much as possible. And if he started off as a jerk, but then eventually him and Kirk became the best buddies, because remember, Leonard Nimoy came in and was part of that first movie.
Yeah. It was a great little spin they had on that. That was... the time.
Yeah, and how he was telling Spock that Kirk was going to be like his best friend, kind of a thing. And it's almost like it gives you that feeling that you take away that life sucks sometimes. Life is hard, it's challenging, but it's the people that we're connected to, and you might not realize it right away, but your story's going to unfold. So Star Trek kind of does that. It kind of tells you, you can kind of put yourself into their position, even though they're in space. So it kind of gives you that grounding tool as a person to, when you go to work, when you go to school, wherever you're at, you can kind of almost picture yourself. Like you can picture who you are as a character and who somebody else would be, and that those interactions and how your story is going to unfold. I really enjoy that because I don't think any other show really did that.
I think that's really important. Hello.
Hello. We just had something pop up on, was it on the computer?
I think the computer agreed with you after that.
It did.
He said, yeah, I agree.
That's interesting.
Okay. Anyway, I think that's interesting that you put that up because you ask any athlete, you ask any coach, you ask anybody, even an actor, they miss the camaraderie when they walk away from the game or when they walk away from the craft. I think a lot of people long for that, even though people who are very, even the most solitary of us, and I'll raise my hand, I like being alone a lot. I like being in my own brain space a lot because, I can bounce some things around and stuff. And it was very hard of me to share some things about myself artistically or even athletically sometimes. There are athletes out there who miss the camaraderie of the locker room, the camaraderie of the sideline or in the dugout. Just the other guys that you're with, mainly because they are taught, just like everybody in a cast is taught in the theater or even in a dance troupe or, et cetera, in a musical group, that you need that other person. That other person is necessary for the whole thing to go together. I think that's a very interesting thing, especially in this day and age where a lot of people are very individualist, wanting to break out and express themselves individually. There's something valuable in that. There's also something valuable in the sense that I can't handle it all. I need something else. I need someone else. Help me and I'll help you.
Right.
That takes a lot of courage.
It does.
It really does because you've got to open yourself up.
Because we all have ego and pride.
Absolutely.
And that kind of takes over sometimes, and you want to say, no, I don't want to look like the fool. I want to show that I can do this. I'm going to do this on my own, and I'm going to just trudge through it. And people need to realize that just like in Star Trek, you start to be like that Kirk, and you start to you're going to be finding yourself alone on a planet somewhere.
Yeah.
And you're going to need some help.
That's great. Well, that's really good to kind of end for this because that makes me feel good. It kind of gives me a little bit of goosebumps. It's a nice. The only thing I can equate it with is it's a small town feeling where there's a familiarity with people, but it gives you hope that the next person you meet down the road, you're going to want to be familiar with them. It's kind of a small town feeling.
Absolutely.
Almost. That's what I kind of like about that.
Absolutely.
So, and you know, the creator of Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry, he when he set out to create Star Trek, he wanted to do something that said, I want to create a wagon train. The wagon train was a small cast, a old Western, where everybody knew each other. It was like a small town feeling. But he wanted to put that in the stars.
Oh, I see.
So I thought, well, it kind of circles back. I wrote some notes down and thought they kind of circled back a little bit. I'm kind of,
that is really interesting.
So anyway, that kind of informs everything that we're talking about, at least in what we love about science fiction and fantasy and comic books and things like that. And it informs definitely who we are and who we want to be. So that's going to end it for this segment of Where No Pod Has Gone Before. Well, that's about all the time we have on Where No Pod Has Gone Before. This is the first episode. I'm not going to try to number the episodes because I want them to kind of stick out on their own. And you listen at your leisure, whichever number you want to listen to first or whatever subject you want to listen to first. We're going to tag everything. We're going to give everything its right and proper information in each of the show notes and things. So just suffice it to say, tonight's episode, Leaving Drydock, is the name of the episode. So I think that kind of gives you an indication that it's probably the first episode anyway. So anyway, for the podcast here, thank you so much for joining us, producer Chris.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I appreciate your insight on this. I mean, I know that you're not a Star Trek fanatic the way other people are.
Right. But surprisingly, when I was talking to you, it brought back a lot of memories for me.
Absolutely.
You know, and I really think that what we came across was a connection that Star Trek has created, and that's why you have so many fans out there that really kind of embody it. Like they take it and they love it because it creates that camaraderie and it creates that vision of hope for people and things like that, and the ability to work together. I think we touched on something there, so that was really cool, and I appreciate you having me on your show.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we're going to have you coming on a little bit more, and to be honest, I want to learn from you guys out there, you people out there, guys, ladies, gentlemen, whatever you want to identify yourselves as. Please get in touch with the podcast at podbefore@gmail.com. That's podbefore@gmail.com. You can catch us on YouTube, Where No Pod Has Gone Before. You can catch us on Facebook, Where No Pod Has Gone Before. Keep in touch with us. And if you have any questions, comments, please let us know. We're going to get better at this. And I really appreciate you giving us the time and giving us the listen. And for now, this is the Pharmacist saying, straight on till morning.
Kick action.
Media.